One last thing, I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of returning faces. For those of you not familiar, a little bit of the why on Family Meal. Family Meal is really sort of based on two ideas. First is this notion that there should be an ongoing forum, in this case quarterly, where the industry can get together and really chop it up, go a little bit deeper, get a little bit more nuanced, and the issues that we're all facing, and allow it to hopefully, through this process, our small group workshops, which are immediately following this, give you some actionable tools, resources that'll arm you to deal with the things that you're dealing with in real time. This is not, our hashtag is less chatter, more matter. That's not really intended just to be cute. That's what we're really about. This is born of us going to a lot of other events where frankly we were just like, okay, there's a lot of cute stories, I didn't learn shit. That's not really going to help me run my business. That's not going to help me figure out, how I'm going to make payroll, right? So we want to be different in that regard. The second thing is we really wanted to expand the conversation to invite a lot of industries, a lot of professionals that are often sidelined from the conversations. These are accountants, recruiters, publicists, real estate brokers, business attorneys, that for some reason are often sidelined from these conversations, yet we all know them, we talk to them 30 times a week, and yet you go to these conferences and it's celebrity chefs, and what about all the people that support those industries? And so, again, creating a space where we're sharing the stage, literally and metaphorically, with a lot of the people that, again, help make our industry tick. So, almost enough of me talking. Speaking of those industries and best-in-class professionals, I'd love to introduce our panelists this evening. So, food columnist for the LA Times, Jenn Harris. Michelin awarded restaurateur and all-around marketing guru, Mr. Josh Kopel. Chef and owner of Bridgetown Roti. Malique's over there too. You're gonna hear from Malique, believe it or not, so that's important. And last but never least, Mr. Everywhere, Max Block, president of Carmen Block PR. I'm still making light. One other quick footnote as we get into the Q&A. As part of the registration process, as you probably noticed, you had the opportunity to ask some questions in advance. I did my best to aggregate those questions and to hopefully make sure we got to most of them. Some of them we're also going to address specifically this evening. Any that we didn't get to, we'll have a Q&A session. I highly encourage you to ask because, again, this is not just window dressing. We're here to actually help. Any that we didn't get to and we're still on that list, as part of our sort of post-event summary, we'll make sure that those have specifically been answered. So, just FYI. Okay. So, why do I feel like I'm louder without the mic? That's possible. So we're going to begin with Jenn Harris. I'm going to hand it over. Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, we only have 4 mics and there's 5 of us. And so the first question, Jenn.
Yes?
How should a restaurant or bar think differently about the reviews and information received from the more established new agencies like the LA Times, or more established legacy agencies, I should say, as compared to the more contemporary digital agencies like Eater and Infatuation, if at all? I think this is something we all kind of wonder as you have these, these monoliths, like the LA Times, and you have so many more digital brands, and so many upstarts, and how should, if at all, should the population, restaurants think differently about those different?
Well, you should only read the LA Times and nothing else. No, I think that in many ways, most of the time, any press is good press. I think people look to the different publications for different things. Because of the way our staffing is and resources, we can't often, or in our publishing schedule, we can't often cover every single opening, so we have to be extremely choosy when we're doing that. But I do think that a place like the LA Times, we've over the years been able to build up a trust with readers. And that is because you know that if we're covering a restaurant, I'm grateful that we have the budget to actually pay for everything. So we went in there, we paid for everything. We're not doing a personal favor to somebody. It's not a collab of some kind. We're not best friends with the chef, so that's why we're covering them. So I think that readers can really look to us as a trustworthy source. And also, like, in many ways, our audiences will overlap with like Eater and Infatuation, which are both really great, digital publications. But if you're, say, our 101 best restaurants list is a perfect example, which this year I had the great privilege of co-writing with our critic Bill Addison. So that comes out December 3rd, just a quick plug. So for that list, for instance, Bill and I went to hundreds of restaurants, we had so many meals, not everything makes it on the list, but I hope you know that if you do make it on this list, you're doing more than a few things right. I hope that answers the question.
No, I think that's great. I mean, I think a lot of people often wonder, like, what is that litmus test? How do you get on? Because I mean, again, taking it back to the perspective of the operator, I've owned and I do own and operate restaurants. So you're always wondering, like, how do I get some love? Why are they getting so much attention? Why am I not getting attention? I mean, you often wonder, is it pay to play? Is it nepotism, friendships? Is it marketing? Is it ad dollars? And that's why, is there something that you've seen that is maybe facilitating why some people are getting, attention and others may not?
There's no one answer to that, but it's definitely not pay to play. It's not the marketing. It's not any one thing really. And we do try to be everywhere all at once. There's actually 5 of me. I'm actually not. I'm not here right now. But no, I mean, it's all the things that make. I saw it. This kind of gets into the next question. Yeah. Which is fun. Do you want to ask that, and then I can?
I'd love to. In all of your years of covering the restaurant scene in Los Angeles, what trends or genres of dining have you found to have the greatest staying power, and which historically struggle to gain traction, and why is that?
Okay, so that's the thing. There's no like magic formula, and it's honestly each restaurant is different, and so it is a case by case basis. But what it has to do with is the whole experience. Also, like, how do you fit into the greater landscape of food and restaurants and hospitality in Los Angeles? Are you saying something with your food? Like, what is the narrative behind what you're doing? All of that comes into play with when we're considering a restaurant. And if it is something where it's like, I get so many pitches all the time, and it's like, if you spend 2 paragraphs on you hired some fancy designer from New York to do this, I really couldn't care less. Like that's not gonna help. Or if I look at the menu and it's literally what's on everybody else, it's the little gem salad, the crudo, the burrata, the soft serve. Sorry, but if it's like if you're not saying something with what you're doing, then it's kind of hard to stand out from the noise. But it's also about consistency. Like, there's a reason why certain places have been around for so long in LA. Like take Mariscos Jalisco, for example. That is the greatest shrimp taco on the planet. Nothing comes close, and it is the same every time you eat it. So consistency is key. I also think it's being willing to adapt, though, if something is not working. A great example is I interviewed Valerie Gordon from Valerie Confections. I know many of you are familiar with her. She's great, but she's a great businesswoman. And so when I asked her, how have you been able to stick around for like 2 decades? She was like, because even if I'm in love with a certain thing I'm doing or a concept and I'm fully behind it, if it is not working, I'll scrap it and do something else. So like, even if you poured money and resources into doing this one thing, maybe it's one thing you have on your menu, or maybe it's the whole concept. If it's not working, don't be afraid to totally scrap it. Yeah. But also, it's like, I can't think of a single trend. I don't think that trends last if you build your concept or restaurant on a single trend. I don't know that it has staying power, and especially also like a genre of food. I don't think there's like a single one that is better, that'll give you an edge over the rest. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like you really have been in the game for a long time, and LA's had an interesting arc. I moved here from New York in 2010, and I would say from 2010 to 2013, our business, which is a lot of consulting, people were calling, all they wanted was, hey, there's this restaurant in New York, blah, 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 how can we emulate that? 2015, every call was like, hey, we're calling from New York, we're calling from Singapore, how do we export some of LA? And that was kind of a big shift, and so I just didn't know if, especially you have this kind of amazing purview where you're kind of, you have an insider's sort of angle and perspective, and yet you're really detached also, and so I just wasn't, I was curious if there was an arc there that you saw. I mean, again, if you look at LA dining over the last 10 years, that's a whole other seminar, frankly. But, well, I mean, look, I want to get to some of the attendee questions. One, this is pretty direct. Is the mainstream press still relevant? And I need you to speak on behalf of the entire mainstream press right now.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, I still have a job, so I would like to say yes. No, I think it's relevant, but I think that's also more of a question for readers. It's because it's kind of like, what types of content are you looking for, and are you willing to pay for it?
Right.
Because a lot of the mainstream media, when you come to my website, you are going to hit a paywall after a certain amount of articles. So I do think that we are relevant in the way that, if I do put something in my column or I write about a certain sandwich, like I hear from the restaurant that there's a line out the door or they got a bump in reservation. So like in that way, we're still relevant, but I just went to go talk to a USC class and I asked them, I said, what gets you in what makes you want to go to a restaurant, spend your time and money, because funds are not plentiful for many of us. And
Maybe not at USC, but
yeah, well, even at USC, and the kids, it was scary. The answer was scary. They were like, well, if we see more than one person that we're following post it, that to me makes me feel like we're not as relevant. But it's also like, who are you going for? Is that the audience who you want to come in maybe once because they saw the restaurant on TikTok and then they're not going to come in again?
Right.
Or are you trying to build more of a community around your restaurant and people who are going to consistently come back? So I think it depends. But yes, we are very relevant still.
I believe you. So thank you. All right, thank you, Jen. We'll come back for some Q&A. Now we're going to speak to Mr. Josh Copel.
Can I say one quick thing about the conversation we just had?
Yep.
Absolutely.
So Jen Harris ate at my fried chicken restaurant with her daddy like 6 years ago. And she did because I invited her. I think that so much of getting earned media, you didn't write this up. It's fine. That's not the point. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that we got a lot of earned media across multiple restaurants, and the reason we did was because we were authentically trying to connect with the people that were writing, and so it wasn't about whether or not she wrote about us. For me, it was about whether or not she knew how hard we were trying to do great work. Because I believed, and I was right on many occasions, not that one, that there would be an occasion that would come up where she would think of us, and she would think of us fondly, because we had made the effort to provide value in advance, which I think is kind of the nature of hospitality in general. And so, if you're looking to get covered, and you're looking to get covered by the LA Times, incessantly email Jen. That's what I did for years. Her email address is online. You can find it. Jen.Harris. It is publicly available. So,
Yeah, that's her ghost email address.
It goes to her assistant.
You're never gonna believe this, but Josh talks for a living. Fun fact. But thank you. So some pointed questions for you, sir. What is the single biggest marketing opportunity missed by most restaurant owners and operators?
Sweet. That's a great question. I wonder where you got it from. So
He's
here's
the only one I'd like to add that rewrote my question.
Here's the thing. Like, if you came to learn, I came to share what I know. And almost every other question that was asked was about new customer acquisition. How do we get more new customers in the door? How do we build awareness for new customers? And that's not what should keep you up at night. What should keep you up at night are how many people go to your OpenTable profile, or to your website, or to your Yelp listing, or TripAdvisor. How many people look at your social media profile and decide to pass? You know, social media is an incredibly poor tool when it comes to customer intent for restaurants. But like, that's always where we go when we think about marketing. But like, how many times have you turned to a friend or spouse and said, where do you want to eat tonight? I'll hop on Instagram to find the place. But you spend so much time worried about your social media profiles, when what you should be thinking about is, when they land on my Yelp page, what are they going to see? When they land on my Open Table, what are they going to see? Is there a specific call to action? Like, am I using evocative language? Because if you set those sales pages up for conversion, they're optimized for mobile, you're saying the right things, you're telling them exactly how to win. You'll convert at a much higher rate. The average restaurant website converts at about a 10% rate. So like, what about the other 9 people that went and passed? Most of you don't have an awareness issue, you have a conversion issue. And then also, on top of that, and I'll shut up, what are you converting them to? And so like, everyone's like, yo, check out my restaurant, come by for a happy hour on Tuesday. What we're trying to do is we're trying to force people to do things that they don't want to do, and we're incentivizing with discounts, which not only creates a transactional relationship, but you're also not making any money, right? We're already working on tight margins. The average full-service restaurant nets out at like 6%. So if that's the case, like, what should we do? We should double down. In my fine dining restaurant, Pru and Proper, I thought we were cranking on Saturdays when we were doing like 15,000. And then I optimized for turn times. And then we began to drive all of the traffic on peak. And then we did 16, and then 18, and then 22,000. And then 24,000, and then we went back to 22,000 because the last 2,000 was too expensive. It was a shit show, it broke the wheel. But what we ultimately figured out was, instead of making 45,000 on the weekends, we could make close to $80,000. On the weekends, on 3 days, we made all of our money we needed to make for the week. And people would come in and say, you're kind of slow on a Wednesday. And I could give a fuck. We'd already made all of our money for the week. So rather than trying to fix the slow services, if we're trying to optimize for conversion and say, come by for dinner this weekend, you'll maximize your capacity. In doing so, you'll also do it at a better margin, right? Because if I double your volume on a Tuesday, your labor model changes. Your prep model changes. But if I double your volume on a Saturday, most of that money is going to flow to the bottom line because your labor is static, your prep is static, you're in a really good place. So I would double down on what's working.
And what is, thank you for that, what is one thing that you feel most restaurants get wrong about the industry?
So here's a mind fuck. This is what changed my whole business. I stopped focusing on B2C. So it was always about, how do we get more customers in? And what I figured out was, my highest and best use was booking events in fine dining and booking catering for our fast casual concept. Because B2B is predictable. Like the SaaS companies will tell you. It's a mathematical formula. If I pick up the phone and I call X number of people, there's a cost to acquire that customer. I pay that cost, and then it pays dividends over time. So I learned this because we opened that fried chicken joint, and what turns out to be a food hall where great businesses go to die. And I couldn't get anyone to go there. And so we were seated in downtown Los Angeles, and I didn't know what to do. And then we got a catering order. It's like, oh, well, this saved the day. And then I got another one. And like, so much of what we do is we just sit there waiting for the phone to ring. But like, every other industry on the planet focuses on outbound sales. So I started calling law firms, economics firms, accounting firms. And I was like, yo, do you order catering? Because if so, I've got some good shit. And it worked, because they were already ordering. So we converted at a much higher level. I'm making a 30% margin on it. I went from making money $16 at a time to making $1,600 per transaction. And they loved me for it. And so for me, and Pru and Proper was the same thing. The first year that we really focused on events, it was all inbound. But I was like collecting materials. We did $250,000 in events. When I started my outbound strategy trying to book holiday parties, we did $1 million the next year in events and $1.4 million the following year. I pushed this out through more than 200 coaching clients. Like, this is the future of our industry. This is how you get out of the 6, 8, 10% margins and start netting out at 20%.
Great, thank you. We've got a lot of questions that were asked from our registers, and I'm going to get to some of them. There's quite a lot. I want to make sure we get to Rashida and Max, and then we can get back to some of these. Are there any specific strategy you found particularly effective in reaching fresh audiences who may not have heard of the business brand location yet? I feel like you addressed some of that. I like this one, focusing on the hyper-local. How can we use marketing online and otherwise reach people within walking distance who may not yet know about our business?
So I interviewed this guy, I host a podcast. I interviewed this guy named TK Pill, and he owns Veggie Grill, which is this like massively growing chain, which is probably one of the least exciting business concepts ever. But the dude fucking cranks. And the reason he cranks is because his food is objectively good whether you're vegetarian or not. But like you can't sell that to people. So he had what he called this food in mouth strategy. And he said, like, where are my best customers when they're not with me? And so he just went to those places with food and fed those people. And in doing so, he drove massive traffic back to the concept. And as you know, they've scaled their household name today. So I would recommend if you want people to try your food, you bring it to where the people are, you have them try it, and then you give them a specific call to action. Come by for lunch this week. Come by for dinner this weekend. And they will. People just want to be told what to do.
Thank you. So one more from the audience. Do you believe that influencer marketing is valuable? And if so, how do you measure ROI?
Yes, I do. But not like the sunglasses at night taking selfies in your restaurant kind of influencers. I'm a huge believer in network effect and leveraging network effect. What I believe is that like if you focus on this like 1 to 100 ratio, who is one person I could talk to that could get me in front of 100 people that would be interested in what I do for a living, you'll do really well. For me in my markets, which were Hollywood and downtown Los Angeles, it was apartment building managers, hotel concierge, office managers, the head of PTA. When we launched Sunday Brunch, we went to every church congregation within 10 miles of the restaurant. Because like they could drive traffic, they can influence audience, and they're interested in what we did for a living. We also didn't like drop coupons, because that's shitty. We said come into the restaurant, bring a friend, experience it firsthand, and then we will collaboratively come up with an idea on how we can do something cool for your congregation, your apartment complex, your office. And it worked really well.
Great, thank you, Josh. Rashida, Chef, how are you?
Is this on?
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm learning from Josh.
He does this again for a living, so you'll be able to find more Josh later. I think what's interesting about Bridgetown and Rashida is, you know, she's, I think, in a pretty small category of chefs who really built a pretty big brand and name for themselves, you know, with your team, really before you had a brick and mortar location, you know, online. I mean, a lot of this, you know, as we know, was born in and around the pandemic when that really wasn't an option, but to have had the success you've had before you even opened your doors via events, word of mouth, etc., catering orders, you know, I feel like you have a very unique purview that a lot of people are going to be interested in understand because, you know, it's really so much, again, about how you marketed and branded yourself and what you all were doing, your mission, and almost, again, now having your brick and mortar location. So question, in a world where brands are fighting for attention in a saturated market and an even more saturated digital sphere, what have you noticed most resonates with viewers?
Myself and my story. I think getting super personal about, because food is personal, right? So like the thing that's always driven traffic to us is me talking and me telling the story and being kind of almost educational, particularly for Caribbean cuisine, which there isn't a lot in LA, so we do a lot of educating on what it is and what we're doing and the influences that inspire the food. So I think you have to be willing to be really, really open and really, really vulnerable in the beginning it helped that we had nothing, so we were just scrappy people scraping at every single opportunity we could get our hands on and saying yes a lot, even though it was really, really tiring for the first couple of years, and I sacrificed a lot in terms of like income in those first couple of years. So, but really just me talking, that's the thing that's always, always, always driven our business forward.
Great.
That's why I'm talking now to you guys.
Do you feel that you have any tricks and trends to help convert thousands of followers into actionable revenue? Because you have a massive following, you've gotten tons of love from the press. How have you been able to, again, translate that into something that you're seeing actionable, something that's actually, you know, directing people through your door now?
Well, it's nice to have a door to direct people through for the first time. When we were a pop-up, that was kind of harder to kind of translate a lot of the press that we got into actual revenue, because I couldn't like, oh, they saw you a million times, and then we got a lot of phone calls like, when are you open? It's like, you want to hear like a 10-minute story about when we're open and where we're going to be and where we are? So that was hard in the beginning, I think. But what it did was, give us enough of a name and a brand that we went from having nothing to having something to have people invest in what we were doing, and B, made that transition not as difficult because we had built that brand up previously. But turning it into actionable, I'm gonna pass this question to my business partner, Malique, because he actually runs our social media. So, what would you say would be your answer to that question?
Malique, come up here.
Come up here, Malique. I'm making him talk.
The agreement was when,
Here, just stand here.
okay.
What was the question?
Basically, I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, are there any tricks or trends you've seen that have been useful to convert all the people that obviously love what you guys are doing, love the brand, love the people behind it, but how does that translate into actual business and getting people in the door?
I think people like an authentic story. I think when you try to be something you're not, and to Jenn's credit, when you build something off of a trend, it can't sustain. So as long as you can tell your story and do it in a way that doesn't feel like you're outdated, and that you want to talk to the people that are alive now and that want to buy food now, I think that makes it special. Because we all have our different stories, but you just have to communicate that in the most effective way. I mean, that could be anything from like putting pictures on your video, using family photos. There's no one trend that works for everybody. I think it just has to talk directly to you and be special to you. And don't feel weird about including your baby pictures when you're telling your food story. It's a part of your story, and people will appreciate it because you're now transparent. You know, it makes people feel like they can come up to your counter, ask you anything, talk to you about patties or that crazy baby. So just as corny as it sounds, be as authentic as possible. Don't hold back, because when you hold back and or try to be something else, things can kind of go not the way you want them to. Am I done?
You're done. Good job, Malique.
I mean, with that, I find that it's interesting where, you know, you've had almost a democratization of the media, really, for better or for worse. And I feel like with that, so much of the content that people love is this very IRL, scrappy, you know, unfiltered, you know, life that's being shared. And nothing against anybody who might work for a social media agency, but a lot of times you'll hire a social media agency and they give you this very scripted, programmatic, you know, plan, and you're like, but this seems to be antithetical to everything that people are into, and this doesn't feel like me. I mean, I think what's fascinating about Bridgetown, if you look at, you know, their social media, for example, is you couldn't possibly pick a pattern or like a strategy. I don't know what your, you know, how you model out, if you even have a plan for your month, what you're going to talk about. But yet it all feels, you feel the connective tissue, even though it doesn't, it seems to be this tossed salad of a identity, and yet it all feels completely connected. And I mean, that's lightning in a bottle also. That's also, I think, a lot of why you've had the success you've had, so I don't know how you necessarily replicate that. But I'll just ask one more this was from the audience. And what does it take, in your opinion, to build a long-standing brand versus another social media fueled flash in the pan? Like, what do you think is that X factor that gives it the staying power?
Not quitting is a really good strategy. I mean, we could have quit a whole bunch of times. We had lots of opportunities to give up.
Joyce would like
Joy would never let us give up. And I think that's a little undervalued, I think, in general. I think most people who are successful just didn't quit trying. It seems simple, but when you're in the trenches and you really, really do want to quit and you have every opportunity to quit, and there's a private chef job over here that's paying you money versus your pop-up that's not, and you're just kind of sticking with it because you know you have something that's going to work and that people love and will get you more in the long run. It's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of being successful, at least I've found. Because I don't know yet. I still feel like we're still in the beginning, even though we've been doing this thing for almost 5 years now, which is crazy to say. Since we just opened the restaurant 6 months ago, so it feels like I've started all over again. But that's kind of the point, right? Your whole career is a series of starts, and then you get to the next thing. Okay, I got to start again with the next idea, and I start again, and just keep starting again, and don't ever quit.
Love it. Thank you. All right. Let's hear from the one and only Max Block. So, what's that? Yeah. So Max
Let's go, kid.
Max is basically, he's the intersection of all these things we've kind of talked about heretofore. So he gets to work with a lot of amazing brands and figure out how to tell their story and what parts to amplify and maybe what parts to not amplify. So as someone who has worked with a lot of notable brands, most of them in the hospitality industry, and one of the reasons I love Max and have asked to be part of this is he's long steeped, works with a lot of great restaurant brands, but he works with a lot of brands that are, have nothing to do with the hospitality industry or maybe hospitality adjacent. And I think that's pretty unique, and it gives him a great perspective. And so what elements of a brand story do you encourage or choose to amplify to the outside world, and why? Like, what is that thing that you look for and you're like, that's the thing we're going to focus on?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of layers to it. I think at the end of the day, number one is you have to think about yourself as a brand. As any brand would, there are multiple layers to them. You're not just looking at Nike and saying shoes. You're not just dining at Bridgetown and having patties. There are so many things that composite to what a restaurant is, a concept is. So there isn't really an answer to that, because our job isn't to say, let's hide this element of the story. It's us saying, how are we going to tell that story to the right audience with the right journalist and the right outlet who's going to be able to share that story authentically? I think that that's really the biggest crutch for us, or crux for it, is if you will feel passionate about part of this story, our job is to find the right means to be able to amplify that story through a public domain space.
Great. And is there, again, when you look at a lot of the brands that you've worked with, again, which span multiple genres and years, et cetera, in LA, but is there something that you found more consistently to be effective in amplifying? Like, hey, I found that when brands lean into this aspect of their identity, because we all know chefs and restaurateurs are fucking mad and crazy, and good luck picking on what particular day, what aspect of what they're spouting out do you really want to go on to, but knowing tomorrow that ship may have sailed. And so, what is that one, that sort of connective tissue or that through line that you often find that hey, I think this has staying power, this seems to be something we can really...
I think that you've heard it a couple of times. I think Jenn said it, I think that Rashida said it, Josh maybe said it, but he was saying a lot. So, but people have a really good bullshit meter. If it doesn't feel like you're telling the truth about your story, or you're painting a picture that isn't authentic, people are going to know that. They're going to pick up on it. So it really is about selling authenticity. We want to sell someone who they are. It isn't a publicist's job to put them into a box and say, this is who you are today. It's our job to take someone at face value of who they are and find the right way to tell that story to the world. So, and it's not, I know it's a non-answer, but if you are...
No, that's a very Max Block answer.
Yeah, it's what you're going to get. So.
No, that's perfect, thank you. So lastly, you know, with restaurants and bars notoriously working on thin margins, you know, it's, and again, I've experienced this a lot. I work with big agencies, non-agencies, everything in the middle, and I think a lot of the thing, you know, that barrier to entry for a lot of restaurants is a lot of PR marketing agencies are freaking expensive, or they can be perceived to be expensive. You can run the numbers to understand what the ROI is, but, you know, if you're the operator and you've decided to make that investment, a 6-month investment, what should they do to make your job easier so that you can most help them? Like, how do you get the most out of those agencies?
Number one, I would stop considering, at least from what we do at Carving Block, we dropped PR from the name of the brand about 2 years ago. I think that what PR is today isn't just the same thing as it was 5 years ago of emailing people like Jenn and inviting them into restaurants. We are your best resource for your world to become actualized. So my team doesn't just draft press releases and send them to journalists. Our job entails everything from identifying the right people to bring into the restaurant that are going to amplify what your message is through brand partnership, through collaboration, through alignment, making sure that we are, of course, staying on the ball as it relates to earned media, social media, and otherwise. But the act of PR is something that it's much bigger and encompassing than it's ever been before. We are your Rolodex for you to actualize what those aspirations are. You might say, Rashida and I might talk and she'd say, I want a Gucci campaign. Okay, great, I love that. That's not gonna fucking happen today. But that doesn't mean it's not gonna happen in 5 years. Who's the brand that I can put Rashida with today to create some sort of campaign moment to build the framework for 5 years from now when we look back at this, that when we're staring at the Gucci billboard, that we know that we did that because of the small steps we took. And that's where PR lives and exists today, and it's different than where it has ever lived or existed previously.
I'm sorry I introduced you as president of Carving Block PR.
It's fine, we drop PR, but Paul doesn't listen very good.
No, thank you. So I've got one more question that was sent in from one of the attendees. Can you discuss how businesses can weather the waves that early press brings to a business? Restaurants often get an initial surge of high popularity thanks to good press like Eater and the LA Times. But months later, when things die down, restaurants must find ways to continue their popularity and attract customers. Is this a positive cycle for restaurants? Should we find ways to break that cycle?
I mean, I think it's certainly not a positive cycle, but I do think that we unfortunately live in an eat or be eaten media landscape of everyone wanting to tell the story first. A lot of outlets that you are looking at, for the most part, aren't wanting to tell the same story that's already been told before. So it is by nature a pretty shitty element of what the media landscape looks like. That said, people like Jenn visit restaurants ad nauseum that find new things and new narratives to tell about the restaurants that they are sharing with their readers. I think at the end of the day, again, it goes back to what Rashida said and what Jenn said, and sure, so Jean.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I said it too.
Yeah, who knows? If you're doing something that you are passionate about and genuine at, you'll weather the storm because you're doing something that day in and day out is you. It is your brand. So the biggest thing that I think that we would look to do is bring in people, and this is something that Josh said, through the community. You want to build, the best brands have brand ambassadors that believe in their brand. There's a reason why you wake up in the morning and you choose to put on Birkenstocks, if I can remember the brand, rather than putting on Uggers. There are brand affiliations that you make, and it's the same thing that we make when we make our choices dining at restaurants than we do with every other aspect of our life. And I think that having those connective tissues really is what elevates a successful brand from someone who is willing to compromise those ideals for what they think is going to be the next most important thing.
And I've got one more question. This one's for the panel, anybody, and Jen, I'll give you the mic back if you'd like to answer this as well. But before we get to the audience, I mean, one thing I've always been perplexed by is, when I moved here from New York, and you get a lot of the, hey, what's better, New York or LA? What's the difference? And over time, they began to realize that aside from it just being chocolate and vanilla ice cream, it's just whatever you're into in that moment. There is absolutely, by the way, anybody who attempts to defend that answer is ridiculous in my opinion. But one thing I've noticed is, and this obviously is a generalization, but in New York, it's very hard to get on somebody's radar because they already have their go-to deli, their go-to Italian spot, their go-to date night spot. So, it's very villagey, neighborhoody, etc. Whereas in LA, they can't wait to try what's next. Getting on somebody's radar in LA is really freaking easy, frankly, with just a little bit of effort and a decent sign. But building loyalty is hard as F. Whereas in New York, it's the opposite. It's really hard to get on the radar, but if you get them in and do a good job, you're probably going to have them for a minute, unless you give them botulism or make some other horrible mistakes. So, what in LA is something that you feel restaurants can do to build that loyalty? And kind of, this is piggybacking on the question I just asked, but to ensure that you're not just a flash in the pan, because there's a new restaurant. By the way, everybody talks about, these restaurants are closing, at breakneck speed, which is true, but I think if you do the math, it's probably like 1.2 restaurants opening for every restaurant that's closing. It's still a very saturated, very competitive market in spite of all the closures. So knowing that, how do you keep people engaged? How do you build loyalty in a market where that just people are just inherently semi-disloyal, looking for what's new? And it's one of the great things about LA.
I'll answer this as a diner, and then I'm sure you probably...
Oh, come on. Maybe I have nothing.
No, I'm excited actually here, and I think it goes back to what Jen said. I think it's consistency. The restaurants that I go back to time and time again are restaurants that I've been going to forever because I know what I can expect. I love sitting at the bar at Jar. I love going to Matsuitsa. I'm not trying to F-about myself. But there are places that I know immediately what I'm having, and I know what I'm getting, and I think it's because it's stayed consistent the entire time. And they may not be of the utmost popularity at any moment, but I still trust that they are going to deliver the same experience to me time and time again. So as a diner, not from a professional standpoint, that's what I consistently am looking for.
You or Josh?
Both,
Oh, me? I mean, I'm going to say the same thing from the other side of the counter. Consistency has always been the thing that's kept us going. And we purposefully haven't really changed our menu very much over the past 5 years because, one, being a pop-up, if someone's going to return, they better have what their friend told them that was there before, or else we're in trouble. And two, when you're dealing with different staff and you're trying to train people, I think food gets really good when people are constantly perfecting the same thing over and over and over again. If you change the menu a lot, or just like not giving them a chance to get great at one thing, then you can lose loyalty just by being too experimental. So I've always thought that like consistency of menu is a thing that's kept us in people's mouths for a long time.
Yeah.
I think customer frequency is the brass ring of our industry. I ask myself a lot of questions. What's that? Oh, yes. I asked myself a lot of questions as a restaurateur when I was trying to figure it out. And like one of the questions I asked myself is like, what happens to my business if everybody that comes in once a month comes in twice a month? Fuck, I'm rich, right? What if everyone that's infrequent starts coming in once a month? And then I started asking myself other questions like, how often do I think about my favorite restaurant in the world? The one I don't own. Never. It's like my favorite restaurant in the world, and I never fucking think about it because I have a wife and a 6-year-old child and a career, and I'm busy, so I never think about it. But like, what would they have to do to convince me to come back? Nothing. Like, just remind me that they exist. Like, we try and come up with all these plans to compel people to come back, when like, all they really need is an invitation and like a singular reason to come in. Something that we executed in my own concepts and worked really well was we would get on Instagram and we would direct message 35 people a day. And we would say, hey, thanks for the follow, how'd you find us? And we'd say, are you busy this weekend? And they would let us know one way or the other. Say, well, you know, if you're not busy, we'd love for you to come by this weekend. We're doing this thing. Think about how warm that audience is. Not only do they come in, but they also follow you on fucking social media, so they're interested in what you have to say. And then the owner reaches out personally and invites you to come in this weekend. What do you think the conversion is on that? 10%? 20%? Statistically, it's going to be about 30 to 35%. So if you send out 35 direct messages a day on a singular platform in a month, you've made 1,000 offers. The way you scale frequency is by scaling the number of offers that you give. A dirty wise man told me once that sales is like standing on a street corner, asking everyone that walks by to kiss you on the mouth. You're going to get slapped in the face a lot, but every now and then, you're going to get a smooch. So, it's a true story. Man, I was like 70 years old. It was filthy. I was 14 at the time. It's for nothing to kid. But the point is this. Like, if you want people to come back, you have to invite them back. And don't invite them back, again, like I said before, for like happy hour on fucking Tuesday. Just say, come in this weekend for dinner. Come by this week for lunch. And let me know when you're coming in. I'd love to say hello. Like, it scales like you wouldn't believe. And so I think that's how you build a loyal following, is by making them feel seen and special even when they're not in your restaurant.
More smooches, less slaps. Got it.
For sure, over time.
Over time.
Jenn?
How do you follow that? No, I think, again, consistency is key, but also even if you have like craveability too. If you have one dish on your menu out of like 50 that you do like exceptionally well, like that is one reason for me to come back, and all you need is one reason for someone to come back. So you can have a crazy menu that's pages long, but if you're doing one thing really, really, really well, then people will come back for that.
Thank you.